Welcome back, everybody. We are continuing the chapter Lamed Ches, the 37th chapter, which we began last week, which would make this the second class on that chapter, whereby the Alter Rebbe points out, as a follow-up to the chapter 36, 37, of the importance, the emphasis in Torah and in Halacha, even when it comes to certain mitzvahs, which one would suggest that the intention of the mitzvah is far greater and more important than the actual fulfilling the mitzvah itself. For example, when it comes to making a blessing, prayer, reciting the Shema, would be a few examples which would follow this type of mitzvah, which is about appreciating, internalizing the message of Hashem Echad, the oneness of Hashem. Or again, prayer is a heart experience. And when it comes to a bracha, it's naturally we're trying to thank Hashem for this which He gave us, and whatever the bracha, obviously the different dimensions or the different types of brachas which exist. If it's thanking Hashem, if it's acknowledging something that Hashem did for us, or for us collectively, individually, and so on. One would suggest again it's about the meaning behind it, but no, the halacha is the opposite. It is so important, and that we recite the bracha, we verbally recite the blessing, and we utter the words of prayer and utter the words of Shema. And again, all based on the message of the Medrash Tanchuma, which is brought, the Medrash Tanchuma Parshas Naseh in His Ava Kodesh Baruch Hu Liyas Leidir V'Tachtenim, brought in chapter 37 and 38, or 36 and 37, which he elaborates on this message that Hashem ultimately wanted this physical world to be transformed to Hashem, and within the person, the Maisa Shabbai, in other words, this which is not so much, or not only with the superior qualities which man and the Yid is gifted with them to utilize them in Avodas Hashem, in the service of God, but as well the faculties which seem to be inferior, like action or even speech in comparison to thought, intellect, and so on, or emotion, which are naturally in relatively inferior. Hashem wants the inferior within man, the tachtenim within man, to be transformed to a lakus, to godliness, and as such it is important, or this is the way it manifests in halacha, that a person has to utter the words, because it's important that his lips should be moving, which is, as the Gemara says, Akim Asvasav, have a maisa, it's a miniature action. Also, the letters which are formed by a person speaking, one speaking, it is also, again, is an expression of the physicality of the human being, how the words are made up by the oxygen and ultimately the formation of letters and words, and that all is important for Hashem, that it is utilized in our Avodas Hashem, in the service of God. So again, recapping briefly, naturally, we're going to go on with Alter Rebbe's message from here. As in the past, you could see the previous class, which is based on, again, Lamed Vav, Lamed Zayin, the 36th and 37th chapter. You can see it in this very site, put in the link box, Tanya, or on the TanyaOnline.com website, which is a website dealing solely of the Tanya class, with the advantage of the text. You could follow along easily with the text, and for easy access to the previous classes, again, with the text. So we're going to go on in this very chapter, right after the two dots. For that matter, we began this message last week, very briefly, but today's class will be namely on this message of the Alter Rebbe, which perhaps maybe a little introduction over here, or rather before we go on with the text, I want to just mention that Alter Rebbe gives a long example, it's till he gets to his message. He elaborates on certain sample ideas which would ultimately demonstrate the message of the Alter Rebbe in this part, which we're learning today. Again, you see even in Tanya, which is not usual to have the different marks which would show that it's a brand new message. It is infrequent, and here you do have this as well. So it's again about 6-7 lines from the top of the page Nun in the original text, the 8th line for that matter, and you could find it in the corresponding English text. We will begin Ach Afal Pikein Amru. And what the Alter Rebbe's message is over here, and he begins with it very clear and say that as much as the emphasis is the transformation of body, transformation, anything which is associated with the Ma'aseh Sheba Adam, meaning to say his inferior qualities, inferior faculties, and inferior qualities, that ought to be transformed to elokus, to godliness. This is the objective, this is the message, this is why we're placed that the neshama serves Hashem not divested of body, but invested in body, to ultimately utilize every faculty to avodas Hashem in the service of God, in conjunction with a very bigger picture. Nisava HaKadosh Baruch Hu Li'Yisli Dira B'Tachteinim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted a dwelling place in the very physical world, and the physical, which means in the most from the most inferior parts of all elements, which is this element, and this element itself, the inferior within this element, within this world, and the way it relates to men as well, not only with his superior kochot, superior qualities, but even with his inferior qualities. Yet, Hashem Alter Rebbe is telling us over here that the same God which has that as the center of the objective, the center of the mandate for the Yid, for Am Yisrael, for anybody serving Hashem, ultimately, namely the Yid, ultimately, Hashem Himself wants our kavanah, Hashem Himself wants our in emotional investment, intellectual investment, our thought investment, not because it makes sense to us, it seems virtually greater, no, but more than that, Hashem Himself wants that that we connect with Him on these levels. We just add it in conjunction with this, not to take so much time. For example, when the Jewish people said Nasa v'nishma, they said we will do, and then we will hear, and then we will appreciate, then we will internalize the message. So it says that they were this way of responding to Hashem was very much acknowledged, as we know, the Nasa v'nishma, the way Nasa comes before Nishma. And again, as the many Gemaras and saying of our sages of our blessed memory, and many Midrashim which emphasize and point out this unique type of response of Am Yisrael. And yet the question is obviously asked: it was the Nasa before the Nishma, so wouldn't it be better if they only said Nasa and not Nishma at all? It's just about, yes, we're going to do because we submit ourselves to your word, Hashem, as a yes man. You say we do. That is the greatest submission. That is the greatest demonstration of bittul, self-nullification to a creator. Perhaps maybe if they would only say Nasa itself, perhaps maybe it would have been even better than the Nishma following the Nasa, meaning to say, yes, it's appreciated. They didn't say in the order of Nishma and Nasa, first we'll understand and appreciate, internalize, and then we will do, because that doesn't demonstrate a submission, a bittul, a a state of, or expression of subjugation to our Creator. Hashem wouldn't have really appreciate that, as opposed to when they said Nasa before Nishma. Hashem appreciated because Hashem understood that they were tofes, means to say that they appreciated the connection, the relationship with the Creator via the Torah, meaning to say it wasn't just any other type of relationship which you approach it not, yes, I will do what you suggest, and then I will go ahead and try to understand it. No, the Jewish people and Hashem, the great appreciation of the Almighty, of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem, was that the Jewish people appreciated with whom they're beginning this relationship with the Almighty Himself. And the Almighty Himself, you don't ask questions. It's Nasa. And then after that, you want to understand, it's fine, Nishma. So Hashem does appreciate this precise order, but apparently, if it's about their demonstration of their bittul, meaning to say the self-nullification to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, their subordinates to their Creator, Apparently, if they would only say nasa, maybe it would have been even better. But the answer, it's not so. Because the same God would wants us to submit ourselves to Him and to do what He says. And again, I'm using that just as a sample or an example. The same God wants the nishma. He wants for us to utilize the rich qualities which He's gifted us or He's created us with. If it's again in the intellectual faculties, our emotional faculties, He wants all that to be utilized as well in our service to God. If not, He wouldn't create us with intellect or heart. Man was created only to serve His master. So why, if He's all about serving His master, and Hashem only wants the nasa, just do it because I asked you to do it, we would be created perhaps as robots, for everything would have been just robotically done, robotically implemented. But Hashem Himself wants wants an emotional relationship, based on a intellectual comprehension of the Yid, of his Creator, of the virtue of Torah, and so on and so forth. Therefore, it wasn't a deficiency, the fact that they follow with Nishma. Quite on the contrary. Nishma is equally important to the Almighty. The only thing is that Hashem wants the Nasa to come before the Nishma. So to use that as a kind of an example to what the Rebbe is saying over here, true, the ultimate objective is to utilize, again, our action, our speech, to utter the words, and this becomes the way, this becomes the manner, the way we implement these mitzvahs, if it's a bracha, or benching the birchat hamazon, the blessings after the meal, or prayer, or kriyat shema. But Al Rebbe is saying over here, in the end of the day, Hashem Himself appreciates that we reconnect to Him also with the kavanah, with the proper intent in the words that we say and the actions we do, and the overall ava, the year, love, fear, based on utilizing my intellect and appreciating the Almighty, His Torah, His mitzvahs, etc. And the Alter Rebbe gives an example over here that, or rather, he quotes with the Chazal tell us, or he quotes, this is what the Chazal relate to us, correct, that tefillah, b'lei bracha, tefillah shai brachas, b'lei kavana, hen kiguf b'lei neshama. That the prayer or any blessing without any kavana intention is like a body without a soul. And a body without a soul is practically, there's no energy. It's dormant. It's, it could be a body without a soul. Not obviously in many different stages, when a person sleeps or after 120 years. Everybody understands there's something very unique to the neshama. If you want to say what is alive, what is life, what is a symbol of life, is obviously the neshama over the guf. And therefore, the Chazal tell us, and let's try to read it inside, if you do it, even though you're doing it in the correct way, based on the overall mandate and objective and goal of fulfilling that taiva of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that desire of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to have a dir b'tachtainim, with the inferior, within the inferior, and again the way it relates to men as well, the inferior within man, the maisa, the action, and in this case to utter the words, yet the same Hashem appreciates that we do it with kavana, and if we and to the extent that it is said, it is brought that it is like a body without a soul. If you do it without the kavanah, without the intention, it's like a body without a soul. Now, we use this as an example. We can understand the great difference when you're dealing with something so lifeless like a body and so full of life like a neshama, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu naturally wants the life, the passion, the energy in our relationship to Him as we fulfill these mitzvahs. So the Alter Rebbe is going to go on again. This is where he elaborates, as we started the classes, where he elaborates with his longer mashal, with his longer example or symbol or sample, which we can relate to and ultimately apply it in our Avodas Hashem to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not only to do what He asks us to do, but yes, with passion, yes, with emotion, and yes, with intellectual investment. So the Alter Rebbe is going to go on to be a Pirush Kamesha Kol Abrim Shebelim Hazeh. שיש להם גוף ונשמה, שהם נפש כל חי ורוח כל בשר איש, ונשמס כל אשר רוח באפיו מכל בעל החיים. והשם מחייס כולם מהווה יסוליין יש תמיד, וער וחייס שמשפיע בהם. What Alter Rebbe is saying over here, let's try to say it a bit orally, or let's take a few moments to invest rather a bit of time to explain this orally and then see how to flow, or the text will naturally flow easier. The Alter Rebbe is saying that, make no mistake, it's not that a body is lifeless. The fact that a body exists, there's lots of life, because if there wouldn't be life and energy, the body wouldn't exist. It would completely disappear. Take something, for example, something so lame and lifeless like a stone. A stone, I would say, this stone is sitting here for thousands of years, doesn't seem like it has any life. And the answer is, the opposite is true. And because if it wouldn't have life, the stone would not be a broken stone, a fractured stone, a fragmented stone. It wouldn't be a stone at all. The fact that there's a stone because there's life and energy coming from the Almighty, from Hashem, which is vitalizing that stone, and I say vitalizing it in a present manner, or rather present tense, rather because it's not only Hashem infused a certain amount of energy in that stone which created it in the 6 days of creation, and it just remains there throughout the last 57, 76 years, 100 years. We say in Davening HaMechadish B'Tuvi B'chol Yom Tamid Ma'aseh V'Reishis, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu vitalizes the world every day, and as the Alter Rebbe writes, Kol Naram Kol Yom, Kol Ei, Kol Shov, Kol Rega, every moment, which means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is constantly pumping energy into that stone, and if Hashem would cease to give energy, to provide energy to that stone, the stone would simply disappear. So there is energy coming to a stone. Now, if we could understand it by a stone, we could understand it by a goof, any body, which a body obviously has more vitality and more signs of vitality, or more movement, or more life. The notion of life in dealing with any goof is much more obvious than a stone, which doesn't move and doesn't grow, and so on and so forth. There's life to even a sleeping body. And a body there's a lot of sophistication to a body, as we know. Can't compare a body to a stone. So we understand that the body is the fact that it exists. There's a lot of vitality. There's a lot of energy coming from the Almighty, which is vitalizing the body. And again, not only when the person was created, but every moment. Hashem is pumping energy into the guf to exist. So there is body, there's a lot of life in the body. So we can't say the body is lifeless, because there exists much life in everything, and certainly things which you see there's movement in them, and by definition, the way they are healthfully represented in this world. For example, a tree is not meant to stay laying in one place; it's meant to grow. So there's even more chayis in the trunk of the tree, especially the body of an animal, and then the body of a human being. So there's a lot of life. And so again, the more the sophistication of the body, we understand there's more important energy invested in that body, for that body has to be revitalized every single moment in order for it to merely exist. And even again, if the body is not actually functioning, if it's asleep, and so on and so forth. So we can't say it's lifeless. So what's so special about the neshama? Now, to say the neshama is all about life, we don't need to explain. The neshama gives life. The neshama brings movement, and brings growth, and it brings expression to a body. And even you're not even talking, even before you introduce the nefesh elikis, the godly soul, just the nefesh kol chai. The person is able to talk, to walk, to move, to do all this because he has a nefesh. God forbid a nefesh leaves the body doesn't do all that stuff. So the nefesh is all about life. And the nefesh of a human being, nefesh of an animal, or even the soul, the energy which makes a tree grow from a small seed to to a stem, to a trunk, to ultimately a tree. There's a lot of nefesh over here. Again, but even though we don't use the word nefesh, only when it comes to the chayis, or the chay rather, and the medaber, the animal, and the human being, because they, again, not only just grow in one place or grow from katnus legadlus, from small to big, but they maneuver and they express themselves in multiple different ways. So really the nefesh applies. You find the nefesh really when it comes to chai and medaber, but also the tree. There's certain energy which is making the tree additional to its mere existence, and making it causing the tree to grow and to produce fruits and so on and so forth. So a nefesh is all about life. So, but yet the fact that we know that every body, even again a stone, there is energy which makes it just exist. So the question is, when we want to demonstrate the importance of davening with kavanah and saying a bracha with kavanah, with intent, and so on, what is it? So why would we say it? That if you daven or you make a bracha without kavanah, it's like a guf b'lei neshama. It's like, it's like a body without a soul. Bodies don't have life. Bodies also have life. There's an energy which makes the body merely just the mere existence of the body, similar to the mere existence of the stone. There's a lot of energy which flows into the body to make it exist. So there's energy. The nefesh obviously has energy. So, if you wanted to say that if the point of davening and saying Shema and making a bracha with kavanah, you want to demonstrate the importance of this, and that they're done with kavanah. In other words, they're done with intention. The appropriate intention, as opposed to just mechanically making the bracha, robotically saying the Shema. Why would you compare it to guf b'lei neshama? The guf also has so much energy, so it has a bit more energy. It seems to be like a quantitative difference, as opposed to a qualitative difference. Has a bit more of chayis. So if you looked at the guf is lifeless, the neshama, which is again obviously all about life, that would be a good comparison when you want to demonstrate the significance of a yid davening with kavanah, with intention. But the fact that we know that the guf also has chayis, also has energy, and much energy, so why would that be the comparison? Why would that be the way to demonstrate the importance, the significance of davening with kavanah? And what Alter Rebbe is going to answer ultimately is, yes, it seems like certainly everything has kavanah, but it isn't just a quantitative difference. When we stop and think, and we think about, for example, that when we contrast the stone to a lively human being, one will never say in the end of the day that it's a quantitative difference. The stone has energy, and this lively person, which is again expressing his nefesh, which is full of life, that it's a quantitative difference. It's something way more than you can say this has 60% of life and energy, this has 70 or 80 and so on. It's a different type of life. It's a different type of energy, as we can all appreciate that. And therefore the Chazal were precise to say that it's a guf b'lei neshama. In the guf there's a lot of energy. And not only that, doing the mitzvah itself, like we gave the example of eating matzah on Pesach, if you have the choice to appreciate what stands behind the mitzvah of eating matzah, and the entire story and the ecstasy of Jewish people leaving Egypt and their important relationship with God as the chosen people, and Hashem gave us the mitzvah of eating matzah to commemorate all that, and so on and so forth, or to eat those crackers, to eat the matzah itself. Obviously you choose the latter of the former, because in this guf there's energy, but more so there's a type of energy within that guf which is aligned with the whole reason why HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the entire creation and every part of creation, the Olamat Elyonim, the supreme Mailamis, and this very physical world, because Nisav HaKadosh Baruch Hu Lizlei did, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to have a dwelling place in this very physical world. And the way to implement this taiva, this desire, because Baruch Hu is fulfilling the mitzvahs the way they manifest in the Torah, again by their physical dimension, taking the matzah and biting it and swallowing the sheer matzah. The measurement of me'ir has to halachically eat. That is the way you fulfill the mitzvah. So certainly the guf of the mitzvah is very important. But yet, how could you compare the life which exists in a guf, in a body, in a laying body, to the life which exists in a nefesh? It's a different type of life. And when a yid does and serves HaKadosh Baruch Hu with passion, with heart, with mind, with soul, the mitzvah is qualitatively different. Similar to the qualitative difference between the chayas, which is found in the nefesh, to the chayas, which is found in a guf. And that's why this example, this parable, which our sages use, is a parable which is very precise, because it does demonstrate really what exists, what kind of performance the mitzvah, what kind of performance the yid performs, that the mitzvah, when he does it with kavanah, with the intention, means with heart and soul and mind and so on, as opposed to if he just does the mitzvah without the neshama, which means without the kavanah, just does the mitzvah in the most dry level possible. The difference is grand, the difference is great. And not only that, not only it makes sense to us, HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself wants the yid ultimately, together with telling the yid that the main thing is doing the ma'aseh, the main thing is eating the matzah, and together with telling the yid the main thing is to say the bracha, the main thing is to utter the shema, and the main thing is to utter the prayer, to verbally utter the prayer, verbally utter the shema, the brachas, and so on. But Hashem himself wants the yid to be completely emotionally involved in the fulfillment of the mitzvah. Ultimately, his relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu via this mitzvah should be an emotional, a very deep and profound relationship. Not only a relationship which is based on submission. So in other words, in the end of the day, even though that itself, to a certain extent, is submitting ourselves to our Creator, because it's Hashem who wants that type of relationship, but the relationship is a rich, passionate relationship. So let's try to find this in the text. So I'm going to actually start at the beginning, from this which we just began. Every part of creation within this physical world, it has body and soul. When we say soul, we don't necessarily mean the nefesh halikis, the godly soul. We mean literally the nefesh kol chai v'ruch kol bsar ish, the soul which brings life, movement, and function to the body, which is every living creature, of anything alive. And Hashem is the one who gives chayas to both of them, to the body and the soul. And Hashem creates them again, not only once Hashem created them in the past, in the 6 days of creation, but on a constant basis. Hashem recreates from a state of nothingness to a state of something, which means if you see a guf, you see a nefesh, Hashem is constantly creating the light and the energy which He provides for them. And here the Alter Rebbe points out this, that the guf, the physical body as well, contains enormous energy from HaKadosh Baruch Hu in order merely to exist. As he says, that even the physical body, the mundane body, even stones and earth, which is daimon, which is part of the inanimate. We know there's daimon, the inanimate, and then the botanical world, which is the world of vegetation, and then you have the balchai, which is the world of the animal, and then you have the medaber. Again, this is the way the compartmentalization within the entire elam, the daimon semechai medaber, but avon, even that's what he says, even avonim, even stones, and even earth, which is part of the daimon, which is part of the inanimate yesh, but Baruch has light and energy. from HaKadosh Baruch Shalei Yachsin Lizayin Ve'efes, that it should not turn to a state of nothingness, and Hashem stops providing that very moment this stone with its energy to exist. It would turn to nothing as no thing at all, Kishahai, the way it was prior to creation. It wasn't like broken stones, and Hashem just created the world, He put everything together. There was nothing. Very difficult for us to understand the notion of nothingness, because we're part of this something, we're part of this Olam. But before HaKadosh Baruch Hu created this world, there was nothing. Nothing is no thing at all. And if HaKadosh Baruch Hu stops pumping in the energy into the stone would return to a state of nothing the way it was before creation. Nonetheless, we can appreciate that ain't out of a demon. In other words, what is Al Tareb saying over here again? So everything ultimately has energy. Nonetheless, in other words, even a goof has independent energy. Nonetheless, there's no similarity between the light and energy which illuminates the body, in comparison to the light and energy which shines in the neshama. Again, the Alter Rebbe is saying, I'm not dealing with a godly soul, dealing with a soul which brings function to every davar chai, to every living object, namely the animal, the bird, the fish, and more so the human being. Can't compare. Similarly, you can't compare the Yitzhak Kodesh Baruch Hu with kavanah, mit heart, with heart, with mind, and this, as opposed to somebody who just does the mitzvah, which again it remains a gufel b'lei neshama. Here the Alter Rebbe goes even deeper. It says, true, you're telling me that you cannot compare, but perhaps there is a common denominator between the two energies which enter into this, which enters into the body, and this which enters into the nefesh. Just because in the end of the day they're part of this very physical world. So why am I telling you over here that there is no erech, there's no dimion, there's no similarity at all, and therefore appreciate to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu with neshama, with kavana, with heart and soul, and so on and so forth, but because there is no comparison. But let's take a step back. Can you really say there is no comparison? Aren't they both of this very same physical world? And we know the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu created this physical world is in a way that He concealed His Arieh HaBilti Balgvul, His infinite light, and invested Himself in this in kind of a limited life. And I say kind of because HaKadosh Baruch Hu was never limited, and even when He does create this very physical, finite, limited Elam Hazeh with a light which has to be finite to some degree, it doesn't mean the light itself is intrinsically finite. Nothing about HaKadosh Baruch Hu is finite. Everything is part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's infinity. But but in the grander picture, this is also part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's greatness, that He's not limited to the infinite. As the famous Mekubal, I believe it's brought in Avaydus HaKodesh, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not limited to the infinite. Because if you limit HaKadosh Baruch Hu to the infinite, you're ultimately limiting HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has koach in the infinity, has koach in the finite. And again, it's ultimately part of the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Importantly, again, to mention. So I say kind of limited, but in the end of the day, the light which enters into this world, because this world, the product of creation of this very physical world, is finite. Everything about this world is limited. It's a finite world, so the light which vitalizes this world is kaviyachol a finite dimension within HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which comes after so many concealments, tzimtzumim concealments, which contract the Eira Bilti Balgvul, the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. For the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu would be manifest in this world, and this world wouldn't be able to be created the way it is. Everything would be consumed to the infinite of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And when you see a world that it exists, it means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu contracted and condensed and concealed His infinite light and allowed a very thin amount of that energy to trickle in and ultimately to create a finite world. So the world which is created is ultimately through that finite dimension. In other words, that little light which trickles through after the many tzimtzumim, the many infinite amount of layers, as the Lashon Al Tereb many times, Ein Kates, Because when you're dealing with infinity, there's no gradual evolvement from the infinite which would ever become finite, because true infinity is that as much as you are going to gradually try to cover and to try to find the connection, the gradual connection between the infinite and the finite, you will never do so, because the true infinity is that it's always infinite. But yet, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, again, so you need the decision of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is generally the idea of Bria Yesh Miyayin, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu's decision, inner decision, that this Eir HaBilti Bal Gvul, this infinite light, is going to be condensed and contracted till the Eir HaBal Gvul, HaGvuli, which means a small, very thin light will trickle through these many, many layers, infinite amount of layers, which cover over of the Bilti Balgvul, the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to ultimately create this physical world. And that's why this physical world is so finite. And by definition, everything about it is finite. Despite it's a grand world and the sun so many times bigger than the earth, and the stars even bigger, and so on. But in the end, you're dealing with things, the creation, with many parts of the creation are huge and grand and many beyond our comprehension, but yet by definition they're still limited. They are finite. If the sun is 167 times the size of the earth, which is the Rambam, the Lashon of the Rambam, Maimonides, it's 167, not 167 and a half, or not 168. So, what else? What is the Alter getting? Yad says, maybe don't get so excited. Could you say Ein Erech V'Dimion? There's no comparison to the light which vitalizes this for the daimim, or the body, rather the guf, and in comparison to the light which vitalizes the nefesh, which is all about life. In the end, they're both byproducts of this very physical world. And if this very physical, so and as such, why are you aggrandizing the chayis which comes and gives to the nefesh in comparison to the chayis which comes to the guf? They're both products of this very physical world, which is again a finite, limited world, which is associated with the most finite energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the difference is not that grand and not that great. We could find many examples, and the onset you would maybe make a difference, but you say, oh no, they're both brothers, and they probably have something within each, something in common, that let's not just say that the difference is absolute. They come from the same parents. It can't be an absolute difference. And the more you'll study them, you'll see the common denominator between them, because they are biological brothers. And the same thing the Alter Rebbe is saying, we just said, Ein Erech V'Dimion, there's no comparison. How could you say there's no comparison? And so the Alter Rebbe continues, even though both of them, may it be the body, may it be the soul, comes from a light which is a concealed, a light which is a concealed light, or a light which comes through after the Hester Panim, and the Levushim, after the complete concealment of the Pnim, the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or Levushim, and the many garments, which is again on the Pnim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which ultimately allows this light, which comes from his Hester in a concealed manner, to create a world where the reality of godliness is concealed, primarily the fact that it's a Eilam Gvuli, it's a physical world, which is a finite world. So it has to come from his Hester, the Hester Panim, the concealed dimension of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Sha'er mistater mislabi uluvushim shavim sha'er. In other words, the light mistater hides itself, misalam, it conceals itself, mislabish bay, and invests in this physical world. And again, shavim, as such, the guf and the nefesh, which we see from this light, apparently have that common denominator, have that similarity. So how could you say the ein erech b'dimim b'neim, that there's no comparison? And again, because Shnei Mei Melam Hazeh, they're both from Melam Hazeh, Shebecholuse, there is something in common, the light and life force which creates Melam Hazeh, Mistater B'Shava, conceals itself equally. Ha'er v'achai is the light and the energy, Shemirok Bigis Baruch, which comes from the speech of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As we know, HaKadosh Baruch Hu spoke creation into being. B'dvar Hashem Shamayim Nasu. It's with the speech of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the world was created. Baruch Sha'omar v'haya ha'elam. HaKadosh Baruch Hu spoke, and the world became. So it's the speech of HaKadosh Baruch Hu which ultimately creates. So the energy which comes from the speech of HaKadosh Baruch Hu which creates this physical world is the same quality of energy which vitalizes, gives energy to the body as much as it gives energy to the soul. Because they both come from that same Hester Panim, that light, which is a light which comes as a result of the concealment of the Pnim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The B'chinas Hester Panim, as he continues. And as the light evolves and the light descends from one world as a chain, from one world to another, from one level to another, as we just explained, as we just took the few moments to explain that it is not just, cannot come gradual, that from an infinite BAYT, from an infinite God, that there should be a light which just after a few steps ultimately would be able to create a finite world, because you're dealing with true infinity, and when infinity expresses itself, there's nothing finite could be in its place. And everything, in this case, the world will be consumed to the infinite of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it has to be not only a few concealments and a few contractions, but be tzimtzumim rabim, many tzimtzumim, many contractions, va'atzumim, and intense contractions, intense concealments, till it invests in Klipas Nega. Now we say Klipas Nega the first time Al Rebbe mentions this word over here, but we had it in the past. This is the force ultimately which creates this finite world. And that's why we said that not only this world is a finite world, but this world does not demonstrate the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is ultimately, it's the only chayis, the only energy which invests in this world is only HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So why is this world, which is constantly vitalized and revitalized but from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, why doesn't it demonstrate that oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? It doesn't have any other independent chayis, independent energy. And we spoke again in the past when we spoke about Nefesh Bahamis, Nefesh Chayunis, that it is associated with the Klipas Nega. It is that intermediary through which the chayis of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the life of the infinite, and God comes through, and ultimately it creates a world not only which is finite, but a world which does not demonstrate the Hashem Echad, despite that every moment it's receiving its energy from Hashem Echad. And then again, we're not going to elaborate on this Klipas Nega, which we spoke about it much in the past, including in the chapter 36, 37. So it invests in Klipas Nega. The Chayis of HaKadosh Baruch Hu invests in Klipas Nega, which ultimately is Mechayeh, gives life to to this every detail of this very physical world. Everything within this world, everything, all the permissible, all this which is pure, meaning to say that there are different stages, as we mentioned again, and we expanded on this, that within the world itself we see different dimensions and different levels. For example, if the world would receive only from one level, how is it that it would be a difference, according to Torah, that is, between the apple and the non-kosher piece of meat? If everything within this physical world is receiving energy from Klipas Nega, even that neutral Klippa, so everything would have needed to be on the same level, for example, as the apple, which the apple, as we mentioned, comes from Klipas Nega. It has that neutrality within it, that I can take it and make a bracha and elevate it to Hashem, and utilize the energy from the consumption of the apple to do a mitzvah, l'shem shamayim, and ultimately, as Al Rebbe mentioned in the 6th chapter, it's elevated to Elokus, it's elevated to God, and as opposed to if I eat it without a bracha, and namely if I take the energy of this apple and I do something, for example, I speak Lashon Hara, so then I'm taking the apple, I'm bringing it down to a lower level, and we said what is a lower level, Sholosh Klipos Atmeis, but apparently when not everything within Elam Haza is the same, we know that there is, for example, the non-kosher piece of meat, that it's intrinsically prohibited, it's intrinsically connected to Sholosh Klipos Atmeis, to this low level of Klippa. Then the question is why, if there is one type of energy coming into this world, why shouldn't everything be neutral? So the Alter Rebbe himself, again in the previous chapters, or namely in the chapter 6 and 7 where he deals with this, he says that yes, there generally what is the intermediary between the Elokus, the obvious, the manifest of Elokus, the way it is manifest in the supreme worlds, the way it comes in this world is Klipas Nega, but yet Klipas Nega, there exists a lower level of impurity, which is the Sholosh Klipos Atmeis, and that itself, when you say it's a lower level of impurity, that itself says that it conceals, it condenses, it covers up, rather, on the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even more than Klipas Nega. The fact that Klipas Nega could produce the apple, that shows, and that apple could have an aliyah, meaning to say that apple could be elevated to Hashem, to Hashem's service. That itself says that there's still a bit of light. As remember we said when we spoke about Klipas Nega, Nega means, the definition, the meaning of Nega means light, that there is still light, meaning to say something which still identifies with the Hashem Echad. As such, I could take the apple and elevate it to the world of Hashem Echad. As we just mentioned, when you eat it with a bracha and you do it l'shem shamayim, with the energy which you receive from that apple, you do it in the onset, you do it for a godly purpose, and you follow through with a godly purpose, so you're identifying the energy of the apple with the Hashem Echad. That shows that Klipas Nega is not the ultimate concealment over the Hashem Echad, of the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, over the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, over the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because I could identify part of the Elam Hazeh which comes from Klipas Nega with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As opposed to, but yet there's another layer, which is the Sholosh Klipos Atmeis, the lowest, and again the nadir level of Klippa, which the fact that it cannot be elevated, I could never take a non-kosher piece of meat and say a bracha on it, and eat it l'shem shamayim for godly purpose. In other words, consume it, gain energy, and open up a Gemara and learn the Gemara. Even though physically I feel so, but in the end of the day, you're bringing your neshama, you're purifying the neshama, you're bringing your neshama into the abyss, you're bringing your Torah, which you subsequently learn, or consequent with the energy which of that piece of meat, you're bringing it as well also into Sholosh Klipos Atmeis, and therefore Hashem says, don't engage with that, don't eat that. It is you have to absolutely stay away from it. And why so? Physically, I feel that I'm gaining energy, and as such, I could perhaps concentrate on the Gemara I am subsequently learning. But in the end of the day, Hashem says, no, there is no light, there is no God, there is no light in the Sholosh Klipos Atmeis. And again, this in the context of this pedic, there's additional layers and additional cover-ups and concealments over the air, even over the Klipas Nega, which in the end game, the result is that there is no light at all. And because there's no light at all, it's only dark and it's only impure. Hashem says, stay away from it, which is, again, it used the example of a piece of meat, but this is the all the 365 mitzvahs, where Hashem says, stay away from, don't try to elevate them, because the level where the Sholosh Klipos Atmeis are intensely, by far, much of the tzimtzumim, rather, are much more intense, and there's many more tzimtzumim. And for this very reason, there is no God, there's no light in the Sholosh Klipos Atmeis. For that very reason, Hashem says, don't try to go there, don't engage with that. So the Alter Rebbe is saying over here, when he's speaking about the energy which comes into Elam Hazeh, in the end, it's all about the Hester Panim. It's all about the concealment of Hashem's face, meaning to say of the infinite, the obvious Hashem Echad, and the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But he just says, we know within Elam Hazeh itself there are different levels. There is this which is still associated with Klipas Nega, which he says this which is pure, this which is permissible. The fact that Hashem says it's permissible, again in the context of eating, the fact that Hashem says yes, you can eat it, that itself says that there is still a bit of nega, a little bit light, which is identified with Hashem Echad. But yet, Al Rebbe goes on, Mimeno Val Yoda, but via, remember we mentioned as well in the previous chapter that the Klipas Nega is an intermediary between Kedusha and Shalosh Klipas Atmeis. Now, the Rebbe brings it out very clear over here, Mimeno, from the Klipas Nega, and via the Klipas Nega, Mushpoim Dvarim Atmeim. The impure receive its energy. Kihib, Chines Mutzas Canal. And it's an intermediary between Kedusha and Shalosh Klipas Atmeis. Shalosh Klipas Atmeis. Now, what is the Alter Rebbe getting at in this context? That the entire energy which comes into this world is associated with the Hester Panim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of the concealment, the cover-up over the face of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Pnim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And why is he saying it? Why is he relating this over here? Because he's asking the question on himself, so to say. I just told you that there's ein erech v'dimyan, there's no comparison to the light and the energy which vitalizes the nefesh, as opposed to the light and life force and energy which vitalizes the body, the guf, which it seems like it's not only a quantitative difference, but it's a qualitative difference. The Alter Rebbe says, perhaps not so, because the guf and the nefesh, they're both part of Elam Hazeh. And the fact they're both part of Elam Hazeh, in other words, they're both byproduct of this very physical world, so they have in common that the life and energy which vitalizes them comes from that klipas nega, which means comes from that energy which covers up over the pnim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which in one word would be klipas nega. And the Alter Rebbe says it doesn't even stop there. There's many more tzimtzumim which ultimately produce even shalosh klipas atmeis. So everything which comes into this world is like we said before, just a trickle of light, a bit of light, which is so finite and so condensed and obscures so much the way the Eibishter is for himself, by himself, the pnim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the belik vul of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And how do we know it? The mere fact that it creates a finite, limited world. So the Eir, which is Mahava Machaya, this world, the Eir, the light which gives Chayas, gives energy to this world, by definition must be finite, must be limited. Again, with the different stages of limitation, but by definition, it's all about Hester Panim, the concealment and the cover-up over the Pnim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So why are you telling me there's such a grand difference between the energy which vitalizes the body to the energy which vitalizes the neshama? Hold it, they both come from the same source. It's the way Hashem invests himself in klipas nega, and again as a hester panim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is what ultimately is mechaya every part of Elam Hazeh. So when the Chachamim wanted to point out the significance of serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu with kavanah as opposed to just doing the mitzvah in a dry manner, meaning to say without the emotional connection, without the mind and soul, why did they use the guf and the neshama as a parable, as an example? So on the surface, yes, it seems ein erech v'dimin, there's no comparison, but no. They both come from the same energy. But yet, Alter Rebbe goes on, and he still wants to say, yes, that example which the Chachamim gave us, the way they contrasted Guf and Neshama, was with much precision. Because we could still appreciate that the Ha'ara Sheyam Shachas HaChayis Hashem Meir Mechayet Derech Levush Zeh Ein Shava B'Kulam, that the light and life force which comes from Hashem via this garment, again the garment of Klipas Nega, is not equal by all of them. The way the light is condensed from Hashem, in other words, it's not that everything is truly equal. The light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which ultimately creates or forms itself into this levush, into this garment, or expresses itself via the garment of Klipas Nega, the light itself, the way it's the different levels of contraction, or the light, the way it's contracted, in order to invest into the levush, into the garment of klipas nega, is different, as it would ultimately create different dimensions within creation. And what Alter Rebbe is saying over here is, for example, when you speak about the daimon semech chai medaber, the light which creates the daimon, the inanimate, is much more it's much more condensed. The contraction is much more intense, and for that reason, the product is something which is the stone, which is lifeless, and again, all parts of the inanimate. And the light which creates the tzemech, the mere fact that you see it's a tree which grows mikatnut legadlut, which means from small, from the seed to the bush, and ultimately to the tree, to the trunk, to the tree, and ultimately bear fruits. That itself shows, and that itself tells you that the light itself is less condensed. And so too, when you find the product, which is the animal, which not only grows but also functions, moves from one place to the other, that itself tells you that the life force and energy which creates the animal is, by definition, greater. In other words, it's less condensed. There's less contractions on that air. And how much more so when you speak about the sophisticated human being. What is the Alter Rebbe going to get at over here? And we'll conclude the class. It's been a bit lengthy. That ultimately, when you speak about the guf of the mitzvah and the neshama of the mitzvah, the difference is indeed grand. Because when you speak about the neshama, the fact that this has a neshama that has the ability to bring function into that physical body, maybe the body of the animal, that it just doesn't stand in one place and gradually grows like a tree, as an example, but it has so many and multiple different functions, and it could produce, and it could move, it could schlep, and it could plow, and so on and so forth. That itself tells you that the difference is not a quantitative difference, but it is indeed ultimately a qualitative difference. In other words, there's a different type of energy which comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu into a nefesh, as opposed to the energy which comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu into a guf, or example of something which doesn't have a nefesh, the stone, or even the tree which does grow and produce fruits. You cannot compare it to a bal chai, to an animal. And how much more so when you think about the nefesh, which gives not only life and brings function to the human being, but the sophistication of the human being. He's able to think, he's able to intellectualize, he's able to speak, which this doesn't exist in the animal world. That itself tells you that the life and energy which is truly going, everything goes via that levush, that garment of klipas nega, but ultimately is significantly less condensed. The light is significantly less there's significant less contraction on that light, which would ultimately produce a nefesh, which becomes the nefesh of the human being. And therefore, the Chazal tell us that the serving of Kadosh Baruch Hu with kavanah, with the appropriate intent, and trying to find the emotional within ourselves to connect to Kadosh Baruch Hu with passion and emotion, with mind and soul. It's not just a bit greater than just doing the mitzvah mechanically, robotically. There's something very significant to it. And I will just add this, what Alter Rebbe is going to point out later, but we made it very clear. It's not just because it makes sense to us. It's part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's plan, as we gave the example of Nasa, the Nishma. HaKadosh Baruch Hu appreciates that Nishma. And then over here as well, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to serve Him with kavanah, with soul, with heart, with mind. And what Alter Rebbe again is once we know that Hashem wants it, and then we can appreciate how truly significant it truly is. We have to understand that true in one hand, and this is the message of the last few chapters and the beginning of chapter Lamed Ches, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us primarily to serve Him with action. And if it's a bracha, it has to be said utterly. You have to verbally utter the bracha. And if it's prayer, it has to be, you have to verbally utter the words. And if it's Shema, even though when it comes to benching or saying a bracha on Shema, one would say that the opposite is so true. It's about identifying with the Hashem Echad, with the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And it's about internalizing the message of Ened Milvadei. And it's about emotionally attaching myself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu when I stand and beseech and pray to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Or when I make the bracha, it's about heart and it's about mind, it's about soul.